Hello everyone, welcome to this presentation. The goal of this presentation, as its title indicates, is to tell you the other side of the story so you can understand why Chinese think Tibet was, is, and will always be a part of China. Since you're listening to this presentation right now, I definitely appreciate your interest, which this means you really cares about what's going on this side of the earth. And I know there's a lot of discussion about the independence of Tibet these days, and if you have ever wondered why there's such an issue and where does all these discussions come from, this presentation is definitely for you. I believe for most of you, the source of information these days is the mainstream media here in the Western world, and based on my experience, it's always beneficial to listen to both sides of the story, so it will give you a big picture and you can make your own judgment. So without further ado, let's get started. Some of the things you can expect out of this presentation, first of all, what is Tibet and who exactly is Dalai Lama? I know you have heard this name many times these days, but is this a real person per se, or is more like a name of a system? And why in history Tibet was a part of China, and why Chinese think Tibet will always be a part of China going forward. And finally, why quote-unquote independent Tibet is not really a free Tibet. And at the end of the presentation, I want to share with you some of my personal thoughts about how to look at these things. And personally, I think this presentation is for those of you who really want to understand the history of Tibet, who want to understand the root cause of those discussions about Tibet, and also for those of you who have an open mind and who are reasonable. And I think being reasonable is very important because some of the things you will hear later in this presentation may not be the same as what you used to hear. And I know there are a bunch of guys who are on YouTube and they really don't like China. They post bad word against China. For those of you, please just feel free to do that right now. You don't really need to waste your time, listen to the presentation anyway. But I do recommend you to listen to it, so it will give you a different point of view, and you can make your own judgment again. But again, the real audience of this presentation is really for those who love truth and who respect fact. When it comes to what is Tibet, especially from a geographical perspective, there are several different opinions. Most people think of Xizang Autonomous Region as what we call Tibet, and some other people say no, it's bigger than that. It now also include part of the areas in Qinghai Province and Sichuan Province. Exactly how big it is, we'll leave that to the expert, but what you can keep in mind is Tibet is at the southwest corner of China, and it's very close to some countries like India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. Especially India and Nepal have played a very important role in the history of Tibet. And we'll talk about that later in this presentation. Some statistics about Tibet. Again, this applies to Xizang Autonomous Region, and it is the highest area on Earth. On average, it's 16,000 feet high, and it's a very large area, the second largest province in China, and compared to the size, it has a very small population. And the majority of the population is what I call Tibetan Chinese. Some people call them Tibetan, but I think it's more accurate to call them Tibetan Chinese, just like African Americans here in the United States. And the rest of the population mainly is the Han group, which is the majority group in China as a whole. And one thing to remember about Tibet is it's a very religious area. It has extremely religious people, and the most popular, probably the only religion out there is the Tibetan Buddhism, which was formed in the 10th century, and it came over from India, of course, in 5th century, and at the end of the 10th century, it really became a homegrown local religion in Tibet. And Tibet was probably one of the only areas in the world that was still ruled by religion as early as 20th century. And as we know, in human history, we're ruled by religions first, and then systems like empires and kingdoms, and then it's democracy. So it's very rare to see very large areas like Tibet that's still ruled by religion that late in human history. And so that's definitely one thing to keep in mind, and we'll definitely talk about that later. Now let's go back in history and see why Chinese think Tibet was a part of China in history. Historical documents shows that as early as 13th century, which is the Yuan dynasty of Chinese history, China already had military presence in Tibet. And in Ming dynasty, a very, very important historical event took place, that is the creation of the title of Dalai Lama. In the past several weeks, when I talked to my friends about what's going on in Tibet and Dalai Lama, some of them think that Dalai Lama is a person we see on TV sometimes. And well, he is Dalai Lama the 14th, but the name of Dalai Lama is more like a system. It's a lineage of religious leader succession rather than an individual. The creation of the name Dalai Lama took place in the year of 1578, and it was a name, quote unquote, created by the Mongolian governor Elton Khan at that time. By the way, Elton Khan was bestowed as the military governor by Ming dynasty, which is the Ming Empire, in 1571, 7 years earlier. And Dalai is a translation of Tibetan, which means ocean, and Lama means someone who's very, very smart. And Dalai Lama combined together means a very smart person whose wisdom is as wide as oceans. And please keep in mind, at the very beginning, the name of Dalai Lama was created only for spiritual and religious reasons, not political. As time went by, the name of Dalai Lama gained more and more significance, and finally, with the help of Qing Empire, it becomes a leader in both political and religious terms. So, two things to take away from this slide. First of all, Dalai Lama is not a single person, it's a system, it's a lineage. And second of all, at the very beginning, it was created for religious purpose, not political. Some of the people who are involved in this historical event, which is the creation of the name Dalai Lama, at the center of the slide is Elton Khan, who was the Mongolian military governor at that time. And he was bestowed as the king of Mongolia by the emperor of Ming dynasty, who is the Emperor Longqing, in the year of 1571. And 7 years later, Elton Khan gave the name of Dalai Lama to Dalai Lama III. It's a very interesting but yet confusing fact that the first person who received the title of Dalai Lama becomes Dalai Lama III, not the first. The reason is there were two lamas prior to him, so they trace back in history and named them Dalai Lama the first and second, and the person who received the Dalai Lama title for the first time in history becomes naturally Dalai Lama III. And for more information about Dalai Lama, you can go to Wikipedia and search by Dalai Lama, and you will get a lot more information. And this is really to give you a brief idea of how it was created in the first place. Due to the duration limitation of YouTube, I have to divide this presentation into different parts. And if you wonder how Dalai Lama becomes the political leader of Tibet, and if there's a period in history that Tibet is independent, please stay with me and search for the part 2 of this presentation. Thank you.